All right, so substance abuse can also become a problem in adolescence. So substance abusers are different than experimenters. So a lot of kids will experiment with smoking, drinking, recreational type drugs, but abusers tend to have more antisocial ways about them. They tend to be more impulsive. They tend to do, they just tend to be the ones that are a little more kind of hardcore. They also tend to be the ones that started earlier, who were trying drugs, were drinking, were smoking at a much earlier age. If you didn't take your first drink or, hit off of, marijuana pipe or whatever until you were 16 or 17, you're less likely to become a substance abuser than the kid that was doing that back when they were 13 or 14. This is affected by genetic factors, right? You can be predisposed to be a substance abuser. Doesn't mean you will become one, but there is a genetic predisposition for it. If you have the genetic predisposition and then you have the environmental factors that can lead to it, you're just more likely to become a substance abuser in adolescence. Living in a lower socioeconomic status area puts you at a higher risk. If your family uses drugs, well, then the drugs are around. You're more likely to pick it up and do it. That goes for smoking and drinking too. If your parents smoke, you are more likely to smoke. If there's alcohol in the house, you are more likely to start drinking alcohol. If your family is having difficulties, if there's a divorce going on, if your parents are struggling with money, if your parents are fighting all the time, if there's abuse in the family, all of that can lead to a risk of becoming a substance abuser. If the child themselves is being physically or sexually abused, that puts you at a much higher risk factor for substance abuse because you're trying to escape, the horrors of your life. And kids that have a poor school performance are also more likely to be substance abusers. Now, this isn't a cause and effect, right? It could be that you're not doing well in school and so you start doing drugs, or it could be you start doing drugs and you start not doing well in school. But there is a correlation there. All right, so for Piaget, we are now at our final stage, which is formal operational thought. You can think hypothetically about things. You can deductively reason from one point out to many solutions. You can come up with different hypotheses. The way that Piaget tested this was he would have a pendulum where he would have many different lengths of string and many different weights, and you would have to figure out which length of string connected to which weight would make the pendulum swing to a specific point. And when you give this problem to younger kids, they just kind of willy-nilly pick, lengths of string and stuff, and just kind of trial and error. Older children will more methodically go about saying, okay, this is how far it needs to swing to, and they'll kind of narrow it down, and then they'll start kind of testing a hypothesis. Like, I think it needs to be, about this long, and you're going to have a little bit of a heavier one. Well, that one didn't work, so maybe it needs to be a little bit lighter, and they'll start testing hypotheses and kind of thinking in a more abstract way. So, a lot of people kind of think that we don't move from a very different stage from concrete operations, that instead we just kind of start being able to just think more abstractly over time, and it's not really a new shift. School-age children do start abstract thinking skills, before Piaget said, which was around 12, usually can think more abstractly before that. And also, formal operations may not be universal. Not everyone may get here. Concrete operational stage is kind of our brain's stopping point naturally. We need to be pushed to get to formal operational thought. We need to be given schooling. We need to be given training in this. Otherwise, our brain just kind of defaults into concrete thought, because concrete thought is what makes sense, right? If I am a farmer, all I really need to know is, how many acres of land do I have? How much should I till? How much, am I going, how much corn am I going to be able to yield this year? How much do I sell that for? It's a very concrete thing. We really only need concrete thought to survive. We don't need to be able to think abstractly to survive in life. Abstraction comes from being given proposed ideas, right? Forcing your brain to go further than it naturally would. So schooling is very much an essential factor to formal operational thought. In countries where schooling isn't universal, we see that adults pretty much universally just have stopped at concrete operations. Right? If you're not given the ability to be told, hey, I want you to try and push yourself to think more abstractly. Think about other options to this. Think about what could be other ways to do this. If that isn't kind of proposed to you, then your brain doesn't kind of naturally go there on its own. So schooling is really what pushes us into this higher level of formal operational thought. So with that ability to have abstract thought does come more self-conscious and self-focusing types of behaviors. Teenagers a lot of times have what we call this imaginary audience, and this kind of goes back to them kind of having that way of thinking that can kind of be, kind of looks like that egocentric thought that we saw in pre-operational development, where, they think that everything's about me. And this imaginary audience, right? Everyone's watching me. Everyone knows what I'm doing. Everyone's judging me. They're a lot more sensitive to criticism because they think, oh, well, there must be something wrong about me. And then they'll kind of go off and then they'll start kind of abstractly thinking about all the things that could possibly go wrong and how horrible I am and blowing everything up, right? That's kind of one of the not so great things about being able to think abstractly. They'll sometimes have this kind of personal fable about themselves where they believe things about themselves that aren't true. Maybe they, because it makes them feel better about themselves. They're not great at planning and decision making yet, because they don't have a lot of experience with it, and a lot of times options seem very overwhelming to them. So while we are kind of trying to push them to think more like adults, they don't have a lot of experience in how to do that and how to make good decisions, how to figure things out on their own. So we really want to be able to do that. We used to have a lot more of this in school, when we used to have more trade in school, where we kind of taught them to do things and forced them to make decisions and learn how to do things on their own, and we don't do that with them as much nowadays, which leads to them not knowing how to make decisions really well. So school transitions that happen in adolescence, in most American school systems, we change schools twice, right? We go to our elementary school, and then to a middle school or a junior high school, and then on to a high school. We do see that grades tend to decline with every transition, right? From elementary to middle school, grades tend to decrease, and then they tend to decrease again from middle school into high school. Part of that has to do with the higher standards and the less supportive teaching environment, right? When you're in grade school, you have one teacher, maybe two, for a grade, right? And that teacher knows you, and they're kind of like this secondary parent to you, and it's more of a kind of like a loving environment. And then you get, boom, pushed into middle school, and all of a sudden now you have 8 different teachers, and you're moving around, and they may know you, but it's not the same kind of supporting environment that you used to be in. And then once you finally get used to that, then boom, we move you into high school, and here's a whole bunch of new teachers. You may have different teachers every semester, and it's difficult. They do show lower self-esteem. We see that kids do better when we give them an 8-4 instead of a 6-3-3 or a 5-3-4 type of schooling. So, K through 5, and then 6, 7, 8, and then 9 to 11, 12 is worse on them than if we just kept them in one school from kindergarten through 8th grade and then only transitioned them once into high school. They do much better when that's just single transition. And then you have school districts where they're transitioning them 3, 4, 5 times sometimes between schools. That's really not good. Kids do not do well with change. Adolescents don't do well with change. It's better when they can just stick in one school with one set of rules and one set of expectations. And it is much harder on girls than boys when the transition happens. And a lot of that has to do with how girl groups and boy groups work, right? Those girl groups are more inclusive and exclusive, right? They don't allow, other people into their groups. So trying to find new friends is harder for girls. We do have a really high school dropout in America, in the United States. In any given year, about 40% to 50% of our kids don't graduate on time. And then about half of those kids will not graduate from high school. It's a humongous amount of children who don't graduate from high school in the United States, and it's kind of shocking and horrible. The way we can prevent it is if we have high quality vocational training, right? Teaching kids in high school a trade. so that when they graduate, they have something they can go and do right now, because not everyone is made for college. That's just how it is. They're not. Not everyone is a college student. A lot of kids would do much better. Just give them a trade, teach them how to go out there and be able to, make enough money to sustain themselves, sustain a family, pay taxes, contribute to society. But we don't do that. We kind of say everyone should go to college, even your kids who really do not have the skill set that is needed to go to college. We should have a high quality vocational training program. There's a lot of this in other industrialized countries, and we have very little of this in America anymore. We used to have it, we got rid of it. And unfortunately, that's contributed to the dropout rate going up in our country. We also need more remedial instruction to help kids that are behind come up to the level of everyone else. We also don't have a lot of that here in America. It would be great if we could have personalized counseling where every kid had a counselor and the counselor didn't have a million kids assigned to them, and the counselor knew the kid and knew what was going on with them inside and outside of school and could see, is this a kid that could need vocational training, then let's put them down that path, or this is a kid that, might do well, going to a 2-year school, or this is a kid that, is Ivy League potential, but really knows the kids and knows how to help them, but we don't have that. Most high schools in America, if they have a counselor, have one counselor for the entire school, maybe 2. All right. Now, you may not realize that if you've grown up around here where we have very good quality schools where there's lots of counselors per kid, but that is not the norm in most high schools in America. Also, children who are in extracurricular activities have a much lower dropout rate. Because they, kind of have something that keeps them going to schools. Even if they don't like their classes, they like their extracurriculars, and so they stay in school because of the extracurriculars. Those extracurricular activities do tend to correlate with higher academic performance. They tend to have better social skills because they have to, right? They have to learn how to get along well with others. They tend to have higher peer acceptance rates, higher self-esteem, more confidence, less antisocial behavior. They tend to have improved family relationships. Like, there's so many good things that go along with being in extracurricular activities. Sports, music, drama, it doesn't matter. Anything that kind of gets those kids in a group where they have friends, where they can show that they're good at something, where they can do their best and, have that, ability to kind of shine. It's good all the way around, right? We really want to have as many of this as possible. Unfortunately, extracurricular activities are almost non-existent in low socioeconomic status areas. And where they are at, they cost money, which prices a lot of kids out. So, when we look around, Frisco area, we have, these great schools. We have an education center right across the street from Collin where we are teaching them trade if they need it. We have all these great extracurricular activities that the students don't even have to pay for, right? It's like a school utopia here, but that is not what we see in a lot of other places in America, unfortunately. All right, that's the end of chapter 11, and we will start in on chapter 12 coming up.